Good day, this is Darnell Meyers-Johnson for SoulMusic.com. It is always a pleasure to speak to one of the greats, and today I'm about to do just that. This gentleman didn't just make music, he created a sound that permeated dance floors all over the world for decades. You know him as one of the creative forces behind the group Chic, with hits like Good Times, Everybody Dance, and I Want Your Love, and he is duly noted for revitalizing the careers of Diana Ross and David Bowie. His new book borrows its title from another Chic hit, Le Freak, an upside down story of family, disco, and destiny. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Nile Rodgers. How are you, sir?
Very well, and yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. Just want to thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us. We do appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure.
Without delay, I just want to jump right into your new book. Your story is a fascinating one, unlike anything that I've ever read before. Why did you decide to share your story now?
Basically, honestly, I was tricked into doing this. I had I got sober about 17 years ago, so people in the New York rock and roll party scene hadn't really seen me for a long time. So a few years ago, I went to a party, and literally there was a friend of mine who was a literary agent, and he really hadn't seen me for about 13 years. And when I walked into the party, he sort of cheered up and he went, "Oh man, my God, Nile is here, the guy with all the great stories." and and he didn't know that I had gone away to a rehab and I was sort of a different guy. But when of course, I started launching into rock and roll stories, and I was at a big rock star's house, so everybody was cracking up because they knew all the stuff was true and they know the people. And and then he asked me to meet him for lunch, and at the lunch he says, you really should write a book. And I said, look, I have no desire to write a book, and also because I'm pretty aware of media and stuff like that. And I was like, look, come on, let's be honest. In America right now, if you're not a star, no one's going to read your book. I said like probably every Kardashian has a book deal, and I come on, who wants to hear this stuff? And he said, no, 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 it's just a fascinating story. I've heard your life story many times, and you should tell it. So then he asked me if I wanted a ghostwriter, and I said, absolutely. Everybody in the music business has a ghostwriter. Nobody sits down and does this stuff.
Right.
And then he tricked me into writing it myself, and he gave me a little test, and he asked me to answer 20 questions, to edit them once, submit them back to him, and don't look at them. And after I did that, all he did was bind them and send them back to me and says, ask yourself a question, read this and see if you think this guy can write. And I read it and I thought, wow, he's right. I guess I can write because I didn't even think I could write. And he says, look at this stuff. It's sort of singing. It's making sense.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. He basically tricked me. I did a proposal, and my book proposal is the thing that got me the deal. I mean, literally, I had meetings set up with 25 publishers, and 14 didn't even want to see me just because they said what I said. I'm not famous enough, and I'm not in a scandal, and
Right. Well, I mean, I do find that fascinating though, because of your history. I mean, you're saying you're not famous enough, but I mean, you have an extended history in the business, and all the hit songs speak for themselves. I'm surprised those people weren't interested in your
No, but
story.
they don't know that. You see, and they're smart enough to know that they're selling books to in a pop culture world that is really star driven.
Right.
And I notice it. I know when I watch when I go to the drugstore and I watch the people on the line looking at those magazines that are just headlines, and that's what people call reading now. Is
Yeah.
headlines. They read headlines. They don't read stories. They just read headlines. And I think that most like I haven't really read any current rock and roll biographies,
Mhm.
but typically when I see them on the shelf, my first instinct is that it's a book full of headlines. It's a book full of headlines, and and my agent really did not want me to do that. He said, "Niall, tell the stories the same way you do when you're at a party."
Right. Yeah.
So I just that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that there wasn't a ghostwriter because I was going to ask you about that because I do think that the book is so well written. I had an opportunity to read another famous music person's book who I don't want to mention, but and I had the exact impression with that book. I just thought, wow, this is just I don't know, and that person had an assistant helping with the writing. So, yeah, I'm glad that you talked about that you did it yourself.
Yeah, well, it took me, 4.5 years to do it. And the funny thing about it is that the book started, the ideology of this book actually started with a completely different idea. My book proposal is the exact same proposal that I gave to a very famous Broadway producer because I wanted to do my life story as a Broadway show. I
Hmm.
didn't want to write a book.
Right.
And I went in and I pitched it, and I thought my pitch was impeccable. I said, think about this. I gave him the outline of my life, which is my proposal. My book proposal and my outline are almost identical if you look at the two documents. It's almost funny that I got a book deal, but meanwhile I couldn't sell this to a big Broadway producer. And
Well,
I said, think about this. I said, and this is before Jersey Boys came out. So I said, think about this. That's actually my real life. And then you throw in Le Freak, Good Times, We Are Family, He's the Greatest Dancer, I Want Your Love, Upside Down, I'm Coming Out, Like a Virgin, the Reflex, China Girl, blah, blah, blah. And I went and I said, so it's like Mamma Mia to the 10th power.
right. Yeah.
I said, if you go see Mamma Mia, you see like 4 or 5 really good ABBA songs, and then the rest of the stuff you don't really know. I said, but this, you have all that Sister Sled stuff, all the Chic stuff, Diana Ross, Bowie, Madonna, blah, blah, Duran Duran. It goes on and on. And the producer looked at me and went, well, those songs are really good, but I don't think the story is that interesting. And I went, okay.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy because like I said, I think the story is fascinating. I can already see it, as I was reading it, I was picturing it actually as a movie because that's how fascinating it was to me. I was like, this just sounds like I'm reading, a screenplay here. Um, you mentioned in the book at the very beginning that your family has a history of revealing long kept secrets to each other, usually around this time of year at holiday dinners. Um, did you have any reservations about sharing so much of that in your book?
Oh no, not at all. My family is so open. Everything that I've written, and maybe the reason why it's a good read is because I was fascinated to learn a lot of this stuff because I interviewed my mom and my brothers and I went over this. The reason why I know numbers and how much they were charging for the drugs and all that
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
because they told me they were, well, we wanted to get $35,000 for it, and I'm like, whoa, really? And I didn't know any of this stuff. So my mother is one of the smartest, most open people you ever want to meet, and
Hmm.
she and we laugh about it, and there was nothing. Matter of fact, the only story that I left out, and it was a big decision, is after I did it, it was my mom talking about her 3 coat hanger abortions.
Hmm.
And I said, Mom, I want you to talk about this stuff because, everybody's going on about, the anti this and anti that and so on and so on. And I was trying to remember, how it used to be. Do people remember what little girls used to go through? And all the young girls in my mom's immediate family, they all went through this stuff. They all tried to hide their pregnancies from their parents, and they did it successfully. And
Hmm.
they would hide it right until the point where they started showing they'd have these coat hanger abortions. A lot of these girls died. A lot of these babies wind up in garbage cans and stuff. And
Right.
when I was doing the research on my book and I found out where my biological father was buried, I also found out another huge statistic. My dad is in Potter's Field, which is called the Cemetery for the Unclaimed Dead,
Hmm.
because when he died, he was a street urchin, heroin addict. And when I was doing research on the Cemetery for the Unclaimed Dead, I found out that most of the bodies that are buried there every year are dead babies, are
Wow.
girls throwing babies in the garbage cans and things like that. There's something like in the state of New York, or at least in the cemetery where my dad is, there's some incredible number, like 3,000 a year. So when I heard that statistic, I went back and I said to my mom, tell me the story of your coat hanger abortions. And the reason why I left that out of the book is because she is so graphic and she's so clear. It actually felt like her story.
Hmm.
So when I turned it into my publisher, they went, "This is fascinating, but how you can't do this in your voice because your mom tells it so well, and I do it as a big quote from her, so it's like an insert. It's almost like a compendium inside my book.
Right, yeah, yeah. The book itself starts off talking about your childhood, which wasn't an ideal one in many ways. You were exposed to a lot in your early youth, particularly um, witnessing drug use and that sort of thing. You were bounced around quite a bit in different homes and schools. As you look back, was there anything that provided you with a sense of security?
A sense of security or insecurity?
A sense of security. Was there anything in that? Because it seemed chaotic, but was there anything within it that made you feel a little bit safe?
Actually, I felt sort of unsafe at home, and I didn't feel unsafe because of my family per se. I felt unsafe because I was very ill. I had multiple asthma attacks, and because my parents were heroin addicts, as were all their friends, they sometimes weren't available. So I actually felt a little safer out in the world of strangers. I lived on the subways. I ran away from home at a very early age, and I lived in movie theaters and places where there were people that were awake. Because when I was a child, junkies looked to me like they were sleeping, standing up. They were nodding, but
Yeah.
it would happen all the time. You could be in the middle of a dynamic conversation, contemplating the films of Alfred Hitchcock, and all of a sudden they weren't talking and standing there with the ashes dangling from the cigarettes, and that was a common sight in my world. So I felt much safer in the world of strangers. We didn't have any stranger danger when I was a kid. They
Yeah.
used to say, "Don't talk to strangers," but
Right.
I think that the concept was when they meant strangers, they meant like a person who was walking down the street with like a, I don't know what stranger, some mythical stranger. But adults were very helpful.
Uh-huh. An underlying theme throughout your book, particularly in the beginning, is this feeling of rejection and not fitting in, kind of like what you were just describing. But at the same time, you were also pretty savvy and you adapted quickly to different situations. So, did you feel as if you were stuck in between low self-esteem and confidence, or was one clearly more prevalent than the other?
Yeah, I really suffered from low self-esteem problems, and the main reason is because of what we call colorism, so to speak. So everybody in my family are really light skinned, in the very the typical beautiful sense. My mom was like a model, gorgeous, and everybody looked like that because when I was younger, I learned that they tried to look like that. They married people that looked like that. They hung out with people that looked that same way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I consequently, literally, my mom got pregnant with me after her second period, and she liked my father, but she only had sex with him because her girlfriend was in the other room having sex with his friend.
Right.
So it wasn't like she sat there and tried to plan out a pregnancy, and she didn't have those same type of prejudices. She didn't think that, well, just because Nile, meaning Nile Senior, was dark skinned, that she wouldn't have a baby with him. But she wasn't trying to have a baby. She
Right.
was just having sex. She was a virgin.
Yeah.
And got pregnant. So when the first child in her immediate family came out really dark like me, it was like, whoa, where did that come from? So I was immediately put up for adoption. That's why my birth certificate doesn't even have my name on it. It has my mother's maiden name. It's funny. I always think about President Obama. The whole big thing about the
Right.
birth
Yeah.
certificate.
The birth certificate.
I was like going, man, if I ran for president, they show you your birth certificate. Well, there's a little bit of a problem because my birth certificate sounds like I'm a Jewish guy. It says Baby Boy Goodman. That's my name is Baby Boy.
Oh man.
So it was very, very. I wouldn't say chilling, but the reality of my life was, as soon as I was born, my mom immediately gave me up for adoption, and she went back to retrieve me a few months later because I think her maternal instinct got the better of her. And in those days, parents had very powerful custodial rights,
Mm-hmm.
and the birth mother, could operate within the system and get her child back, and that's what she did. And So I think that there was some strange thing between us because I probably bonded with the woman who was my first caretaker, my foster parent,
Mm-hmm.
because it was some time before my mom got me. And when you analyze my name, which is Nile Rodgers, like my dad, well, I'm not really a junior because my middle name is Gregory, and I only found out during the writing of the book that the only reason why my middle name is Gregory is because that's what the albino woman that my mom had given me over. The woman was albino who couldn't have children of her own,
Mm-hmm.
and she named me Gregory.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought it was odd that my middle name was Gregory, so my name was Nile Gregory Rodgers, or my father's name is Nile Erskine Rodgers, but they still called me Junior.
Mm.
And so when I asked my mom, I said, "Where did the name Gregory come from?" She says, "Well, that was the name that they were calling you, so I kept that name because you seemed to respond to it."
Right. Yeah. Now, as I was reading the book, I did wonder if at any point did you ever have the opportunity to reunite with your original foster mom?
No, that's something that I've thought about a lot, but she would even if she were alive today, it was so sad for her. I mean, that story is really sad. Um, how she was clinging to my mom's feet and begging her and said she'll give her all of her money because obviously she had bonded with me. At that point, I was her son.
Right.
So the last thing I would want to do is to cause her any further harm. Who knows how traumatic that was for her? Who knows what condition she's in now? And obviously she'd be older than my mom because her words to my mother, which my mom imparted to me, was they were, you're so young and beautiful, you can have 1,000,000 children, and you can have them anytime you want. I can't have any. So I assume that the woman was considerably older than my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So if my mom is now 70, whatever, 74, I guess, this woman could easily be 80ish or something.
Right. Yeah.
And earlier on in my life, I didn't have any desire to see her because, of course, it felt to me like that would be cruel.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, in the beginning, as the chapters covering your childhood, you do talk about your biological father as well as your stepfather and other gentlemen who seem to, at least in some regard, play, if not necessarily a fatherly role, at least, they were there as an older male.
Mm-hmm.
But you yourself, you never ended up having children of your own, although you clearly had enough female companionship. Was that a conscious thing to you, or did you ever?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody always tells me that I'd make a great father. Well, I have a charity now called the We Are Family Foundation, and I bring in 35 kids every year from all around the world, and I got more kids than you can imagine right now. And even when they have kids, if I'm around, I'll be some kind of relative to them. So I didn't have many positive examples of the typical American family life in my general field of view. So I never really wanted to have children in a traditional family like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly didn't have the type of ego that says, if I have a child, it needs to be of my blood and all that sort of thing.
Right.
I just didn't have that thing inside me. So if I were to have children or a family, I'd probably adopt anyway. So it didn't really, that never hit me. I never had that thing inside me, ever. Like I never, it was, I came close to getting married once, and even that felt uncomfortable. I was like, wow, what are we doing?
I'm sure many people can relate to that. In terms of your musical abilities and your youth, who began encouraging you? Was there anybody in particular who, just began giving you positive feedback regarding that?
That my musical development happened almost organically. I was part of the New York City school system, which had a very robust and thorough curriculum at the time, music being one of the many subjects that all children were taught. Um, the main reason why there aren't that many musicians that come directly, actually there are a lot, but people don't think of that being the training camp or the breeding ground for music, because everybody had it. So when you think about the numbers, the millions of kids in that system, the small number who actually become professional musicians compared to the amount of kids that are in it, people don't think of it as a great farm club or boot camp, if you will. But for
Right.
me, because I took to music, it was. And I used the New York City school system as well as the Los Angeles school system, because in those days America had a standardized curriculum, so you were learning the same thing in New York that you were in the ghetto in LA.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what I did was, those were the subjects that I took to, music and science, whereas a lot of other kids take to art or gym and things like that. And you know, it's easy to see in sports how school sports play a role in professional sports,
Right.
but
Right.
it's not that easy to see it in music. In my case, because I gravitated towards music, um, it worked. Also, with sports programs, you have the alumni who said who support it and all that stuff. They typically don't do that with music,
Right.
because it doesn't affect the whole community the way sports do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really the same thing. So if you think about a kid coming up through the public school system and going on and becoming a high school player and then a college player and then a pro player, that's what happened to me. It was exactly that same type of thing.